Between the hills, the stars, the sky, the river so clear, river so clear.
Let us join in a spirit of meditation, reflection, or prayer as we deepen into our service and share opening words for this morning. In working with our guest speaker today, Ryan Taylor, he provided some readings, and I will share one of those. For our opening words, it's a poem by Charlie Russell, and it's titled, Where Tracks Spell War or Meat. Where Tracks Spell War or Meat, written by Charles M. Russell. Nature taught her child to read, to write, and spell, and with her books before him, he reads his lesson well. Each day is but a page, his God, the sun, has turned. Each year a chapter taught, her child has read and learned. A broken twig, a stone is turned, disturbed by passing feet. His eye has caught it all, for tracks spell war or meat. Nature holds his Bible, with pages open wide. He questions not her miracles. 'Tis done, he's satisfied. He loves his mother country, where all her creatures trod, yet he is called a heathen, who has always lived with God. We join Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists all over the world in lighting our chalice. Would Mary Wilson please come forward to light the chalice, which is a symbol of the spark of life in each of us. If you're on Zoom and you have your chalice with you, I invite you to turn on your video and share while we light them here. We are in good company. Our chalice lighting words today are called Determined Seed by Laura Wallace. As frozen earth holds the determined seed, this sacred space holds our weariness, our worry, our laughter, and our celebration. Let us bring seed and soul into the light of thought, the warmth of community, and the hope of love. Let us see together, hear together, love together. Let us worship. Ryan and I are friends from way back. We knew each other in college, and so it's really fun for me to be able to introduce him and be part of this program today. But when we set this up, Ryan shared the following 1839 description of our Prairie and Coteau region from the journals of a French explorer, Joseph Nicolet, on his 1839 journey across the prairie between Fort Pierre, South Dakota, and Devil's Lake, North Dakota. So on page 36 of a piece called Joseph N. Nicolet on the Plains and Prairies, the Expeditions of 1838 to 1839, which sounds very historical, upon finding a man in his party named Dixon who had gone out ahead scouting. This is a description of how they found Dixon. We found him in the most ecstatic contemplation before the vast and magnificent valley of the Red River, which there displayed itself before us, spreading itself in an almost insensible slope to the east, to the north, and the south, and bounded only by the horizon. May I not be permitted in this place to introduce a few reflections on the magical influences of the prairies. It is difficult to express by words the varied impressions which their spectacle produces. Their sight never wearies. To look at a prairie up or down, to ascend one of its undulations, to reach a small plateau, or as the voyagers called it, a prairie planche, I don't know if that's right, moving from wave to wave over alternate swells and depressions, and finally to reach the vast, interminable low prairie that extends itself in front, be it for hours, days, or weeks. One never tires. Pleasurable and exhilarating sensations are all the time felt. Ennui is never experienced. Doubtless, there are moments when excessive heat, a want of fresh water, and other privations remind one that life is a toil. But these drawbacks are of short duration. There is almost always a breeze over them. The security one feels in knowing that there are no concealed dangers, so vast is the extent which the eye takes in, no difficulties of road, a far-spreading verdure, relieved by a profusion of variously colored flowers, the azure of the sky above, or the tempest that can be seen from its beginning to its end, the beautiful modifications of the changing clouds, the curious looming of objects between earth and sky, taxing the ingenuity every moment to rectify. Everything is calculated to excite the perceptions and keep alive the imagination. In the summer season, especially, everything upon the prairies is cheerful, graceful and animated. The Indians with herds of deer, antelope, and buffalo give life and motion to them. It is then they should be visited, and I pity the man whose soul could remain unmoved under such a scene of excitement. Well, today it is my honor to introduce a program titled The Land and Our Stewardship of It with Ryan Taylor. As I noted earlier, Ryan is an old friend, as is his wife, Nikki, and I'm so happy to have them here today. Ryan is also the Director of Public Policy for Ducks Unlimited for North Dakota, South Dakota, and Montana. He has a special interest in agricultural public policy that helps align the goals of farmers, ranchers, sportsmen and women, and conservationists in voluntary working lands habitat conservation. He owns and manages his family's cattle ranch near Towner, a ranch homesteaded by his family in 1903. He has served in the North Dakota State Senate from 2002 to 2012, and in 2015, he was appointed by the president to serve as the state director for USDA Rural Development. Taylor was named a Bush Foundation Leadership Fellow in 2013, and he graduated from NDSU in 1992 with degrees in Ag Econ and Mass Comm. And he enjoys life on the prairie with his beautiful wife, Nikki, and their 3 high school and college age children. And without further ado, Ryan, please come forward.
Pleasure to be with you this morning, and I appreciate the invitation from Marnie. I still remember walking to a Mass Comm class in Menard Hall with Marnie Butcher at that time, and it's good to be together again. We're going to talk about land and stewardship and family ranching a bit today, and I appreciate the readings that Marnie shared with you, a couple things that were always special to me, and I heard that Joseph Nicolette description this last summer at a Leopold Conservation Award down in Veblen, South Dakota, and the South Dakota State President had shared that with me, and it just meant a lot to me. I appreciate the land acknowledgement that's already been made today, and knowing the land that we stand upon it's not ours, and it's belonged to many people. And a wonderful time of year to be in a place that can overlook the Mene Chauché, the waters astir, as the Lakota and the Dakota call it, and what a literal description of the Missouri River at this time, right? Waters astir. I hope you didn't come to hear a bona fide preacher talk today, because if you did, you're out of luck. But the topic at hand that Marnie gave me about conservation and the land, and as I would say, our stewardship of it is something that I hope to know a little bit about, as she mentioned, with my work at DU, which is really centered on preserving grasslands and wetlands, and that's dear to my heart, and those of us that get to live upon the land and have done so for generations, it means a lot to us. I think a lot about the land. I think a lot about too many things, too much sometimes. But when I think about the land and how we care for it, I think about our responsibility for it. And I'm a graduate of agricultural economics. So as economics, we study, the very nuts and bolts, dollars and cents of things, right? And we're trained in things like the private property rights and how as a society, we've really organized things, right? So there's this order of things that if your name is upon a piece of paper and you file it at the courthouse, that is yours, right? Good fences make good neighbors, as they say. And then all of a sudden we have a claim upon it. But I sometimes wonder whose land this really is, right? Is it really mine? Is it yours? Is it everybody's? Is it nobody's? And when I think about it maybe not being ours, I remember the words of Psalm 50. And in that psalm, it says, "For every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains and the insects in the field are mine, for the world is mine and all that is in it." And that doesn't mean mine as in mine. It means mine as in someone else's, a higher power's creation. And if it's not ours individually, and maybe it's all of ours together, or none of ours, but what it is all of ours responsibility. We all share the responsibility, entrusted with the 1,000 hills, and the cattle and the birds and the insects. And I wonder sometimes if that trust that we have to be responsible, is it misplaced? Or is it like grace, just something that we receive, whether we deserve it or not, unconditionally? So we're talking a little bit about stewardship today, and I think stewardship is about trust. Trust is earned. I like the example that Governor Art Link had in the line when he had that piece called When the Landscape is Quiet Again, and a little speech that was written down on a scrap of paper and given at an electric co-op meeting across the river here, I think for the More Grand Sioux Co-op. And as you maybe know, he gave that at the start of our coal boom. And it said, when we are through with that and the landscape is quiet again, let those who follow and repopulate the land be able to say, our grandparents did their job well. Only if they can say this, will we be worthy of the rich heritage of our land and its resources. Worthy is the word I key in on, because that's trustworthy. Are we trustworthy? And I'm big on trust. It's the currency of every transaction and every relationship, whether it's with people. Do we have trust? How much do we spend and earn on our trust with each other? In business, it's in working with animals, whether you train some horses and some of you maybe work with dogs. If you don't have trust, you really don't have anything with any person, business, or animal. I remember the story of the fellow who lied so much, he had to get someone else to call his dog for him. Even the dog quit believing him, right? You know. I like this passage, just another one to share that I think will kind of guide us a little bit today, and it's from the first book of Titus in chapter 7, and it's about stewardship, or they call it an overseer. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant, or quick-tempered, or a drunkard, or violent, or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. There's a lot there, right? A lot of things to do and a lot of things not to do. And I read that and I think it's kind of like the ESG expectation for all of us, right? If you know what ESG, it's environment, social governance, and within investment, there's folks that want to make sure if they invest in something or some entity that they have a record that they would like them to have on the environment, on social justice, on transparent governance and good governance. And I think that's kind of an ESG expectation for all of us about how we ought to treat the environment and people. I think it's an expectation of what we should have for our leaders, that we are not violent or greedy for gain, but we're lovers of good, and that we're self-disciplined and upright. I think about that passage not only on stewardship for us as people, but now we ask ourselves, what should we steward? So look around us. We could steward the Amazon rainforest. It's an important place. We could steward the oceans of the earth, and those are important, and they're thousands of miles away. Or we could steward what's right here in our own backyard, or in my case, a ranch. And it has to be entrusted to us to do what's right. I've felt the weight of that trust. Sometimes it's a joy, sometimes it's a weight. As Marnie mentioned, on a ranch that we've lived on in my family since 1903. And we've kept it pretty true to itself. It's native prairie. It's the indigenous plant communities that have been there for millennia. It's the wildlife that have been there. It's cows now that we use to mimic the bison to do what they did on this same land. It's the wetlands, the very same as they were left when the glaciers last retreated, right? And I guess I've kind of followed the advice of Theodore Roosevelt, as he said at the Grand Canyon. Leave it as it is. You can't improve it. The ages have been worked on at it, and man can only mar it. So when I ride to the top of a hill on our ranch, just as Marnie mentioned in the reading of Nicolette's, I find myself in a most ecstatic contemplation. I love that phrase, right? The most ecstatic contemplation. No feelings of ennui, the French word for listlessness or boredom. I have no ennui when I am in ecstatic contemplation. The prairie, some would say, is an acquired taste, not as easy to fall in love with as a shining sea or a purple mountain majesty. As they say, anyone can love a mountain, but it takes a soul to love the prairie. It's like the James Thurber quote you may have seen in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, the movie and the adaptation. If you saw that, had Ben Stiller and Sean Penn in it, so you know it's going to be good, right? And Ben Stiller spends most of the movie trying to find Sean Penn, the photographer, and he finds him finally in the Himalayas, and he's watching for the ghost cat, a snow leopard. And Sean Penn's character is explaining to Ben Stiller how elusive this ghost cat is and how hard it is to find. And he says, beautiful things don't ask for attention, right? And then finally the ghost cat comes up within front of his camera in his extended lens, and Sean Penn just looks. He never snaps the shutter. He just is in the moment, right? And they both sit there and realize that that beautiful thing did not ask for attention. And the prairie is that way. The prairie doesn't ask for attention. Boy, more than anything, the prairie never asks for attention, does it? But I think as good stewards of the land, we have to give it attention. And sometimes that attention is active, and sometimes it's passive, right? And when I think about active attention, I think about my mother, a true woman of the prairie and a woman of the land. She was a 6-foot-tall Norwegian named Elizabeth Taylor. And she loved to introduce herself as Liz Taylor. And she loved to tell folks she was just 5'12" when they asked how tall she was. And she often asked for attention, but sometimes she didn't ask for attention, but she still got it. I can guarantee that. And one day she was driving to our mailbox at the ranch up there in McHenry County. And the mailbox was over 3 miles from our ranch. So we are beyond rural. We're even beyond the rural of rural free delivery of our mail. You have to drive 3.5 miles to get the mail. And along that drive, it's green pastures and sand hills and juneberries and poplar trees. And then there's an open stretch of prairie with 3 tall stately cottonwoods growing in the east ditch that were just planted there by wind and accident of seed. And they were well spaced. And on the day that she was driving there one time, she's heading to the mailbox and she sees a fella there unpacking his chainsaw, and he's got his pickup, and everyone knew him. This was Slug. He was a local guy that did stuff for folks, and short for Slugger, his more appropriate name. And she asked Slug, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, Fritz, the county commissioner, asked me to cut these trees down," he said. And Mom knew a county commissioner would be concerned about snow drifting across the road and catching and maybe blocking the road. But she knew that those 3 cottonwoods in the east ditch weren't blocking the road. There was a high spot on the west side, and there were some scrub willows over there, and that would sure enough drift across the road, but those 3 cottonwoods weren't causing any problems. And she said, Slug, she said, "How much is Fritz paying you to cut down these trees?" And Slug said rather proudly, $20. And Mom dug into her pocket. She found a $20 bill, and she handed it to Slug, and she said, "Why don't you quit cutting and tell him your chainsaw broke?" And Slug just smiled big, and he put that $20 in his pocket, put his chainsaw back in the pickup, and drove away. And those trees were never cut down. And she enjoyed them for the rest of her life, and Nikki and I and the kids have enjoyed it for a good portion of ours years after that. And every time we drive by them, I tell the kids those are Grandma's trees, right? Grandma who saved those 3 trees with a $20 bill. So that's active stewardship, active attention, giving attention to those cottonwoods. And sometimes stewardship is what we do, and sometimes it's what we don't do. When I was a fellow with the Bush Foundation, I had the opportunity to travel to Norway, and it was in search of lessons that maybe could help guide North Dakota's oil boom, because Norway had been there, done that, got the t-shirt, right? They'd been in an oil boom that started in 1970, and they wrote the regulations, which are fairly famous. They were called the 10 Commandments of oil regulation and what they wanted to be as a country when they started that process. And I talked to a lot of people in government and their agencies and NGOs, in the industry itself. I even hitched a ride on a crew helicopter and spent a day on an oil platform in the North Sea. And at one stop on land in the country, I got to talk with an engineer for Stat Oil. Now it's called Equinor, and they're the once wholly owned, state-owned oil company of Norway. Now they're partly state-owned oil company of Norway that does a lot of the development. And as we were visiting, we got on the topic of the Macondo oil spill, which you remember was the big spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And if you remember, sometimes it's called the BP Deepwater Horizon spill. And that spill certainly got a lot of attention. Tragically, it was a spill and a blowout that killed 11 workers when it blew. It released 4.9 million barrels of oil, and it did that for 87 days. 87 days. 210 million gallons if you do the calculation on those 4.9 million barrels. And as I was talking to this engineer, we got on the topic of that spill and why it happened and how could it have been prevented. And I keep thinking there must be some piece of technology we missed. Was there some kind of preventer, blowout preventer that wasn't used? There's some kind of a fix that wasn't there? And I'll always remember what he said. And he said his company, which is global, also had rigs in the Gulf of Mexico in that very same area, he said. And they had a drilling rig not far from Macondo, and he said it was the same problems. There was pressure and there was disruptions, and he said it was a hard go. And then he said, and he paused, but we are Norwegians. And sometimes we back off and we take it easy. And I thought that was profound. I was looking for technology. I wanted a fix. I wanted something that made things easier to not blow out a well, kill 11 workers, and spill 4.9 million barrels of oil. It was just a matter of not pushing, not being violent, not being greedy for gain, right? And he just backed off and they took it easy. And that was what I consider passive stewardship. It's something we didn't do. Whoever was on that rig knew that when you get to that point, you just back off, and it maybe saved that well and saved another well that could have released the oil that the Macondo did. Do not be arrogant or violent or greedy for gain. The Norwegians, self-controlled and disciplined in that case. So stewardship, I know, takes some generosity. I told you Mom found that $20 bill. That's an act of generosity to pull that out and save those trees. For that oil driller, it took generosity of time, because time is money, right? As we often hear. And in those situations, in some companies, it's very much a lot of money. So it takes generosity not to be greedy for gain and to look for better solutions to our most perplexing problems. So finally, I have an interest in native language and in native cultures, as you might tell from some of the readings. And I know there's wisdom to be gained from those who nature taught to read, to write, and spell, who loves their mother country where all her creatures trod. In my appreciation for words and other languages, I once asked my friend Dakota Goodhouse, as we talk about generosity and the importance of that, I asked Dakota, what's the Lakota word for generosity? And he thought about it for a little bit, and he said, well, what we use for the word for generosity, he said, is wachan taganaka. Wachan taganaka. I may not be the best pronunciator of that, but that was the word. And then I asked him, I said, well, I'm interested where that comes from. You know, what does that mean? What's the roots? And he thought about it, and he had a thought about it this way before. And he said, well, wa is like an extra syllable that turns a noun into a verb, or a verb into a noun, and makes a word out of it. And they said, chanto, chante is heart. Chante is heart. And taganaka literally means to place within. So, wow, and he was kind of struck by it. He said, well, I never thought about it that way. When you put that word together, generosity means to place within your heart. Who and what do you place within your heart is the word for generosity. And I thought, what a perfect word. What a perfect sentiment for generosity. And on the other side of the world, as the Lakota were using the word wachan taganaka, the book of Matthew was written, and it said, where your treasure lies, there your heart will be also. Where's our treasure? If we look, that's where our heart is, right? And think about that a little bit as we think about the land and stewardship of it, the generosity of what it's going to take to have this prairie as pristine as it can be, and maybe match what Joseph Nicolette found in 1839 in a way that seemed perfect at the time, in a way that Charlie Russell's characters described his friends in the Blackfoot Nation that he was fond of, who loved their mother country, where all their creatures trod. And let us think about that, in that as we think about how we can be generous in that we are good stewards. As a community of people gathered here today, that we are hospitable, lovers of good, self-controlled, disciplined, and generous. And may we all place this prairie in our hearts. Thank you.
My question is, when you quote of Art Link, I wonder Where do you think our grandchildren will see us today?
Well, that's a good question, and I think the jury is out on that. And I think our grandchildren could be very disappointed in some ways. But as they always say, it's never too late to start, right? We're doing a lot of things to the landscape, and we're doing a lot of things to the prairie. And so I'm actually going to be part of within the ELCA, a group that's working on a social statement of civic life, right? And I think we all know what the right thing is, right? In our heart of hearts, we know what the right thing is. And then we have to find the courage and the ability to extend that in community of what the right thing is. And we'll probably harvest a lot of oil in North Dakota. We've obviously harvested coal, and thanks to Art's work, there's reclamation, and that's by regulation and law that land is reclaimed. And we still have the power to reclaim and clean up the prairie after what we've done is done, right? But will we have the courage to do that, right? And the generosity, and know that it's going to take something, right? I like to be hopeful. I live in hope. We have our oldest is a freshman in college now, and so these generations are kind of looming before us, and it is my sincere hope that they will be proud of us. And if they're not, shame on us, right? Shame on all of us. Yeah.
So as you move forward and leave here today, I hope, like those in Nicolette's party, that in the week to come, you find yourself engaged in both ecstatic contemplation of the beauty around you and enthralled by the magical influence of the prairies.
And the world will be a better place, and the world will be a better place for you and me. Just wait and see. Another day goes by and see the children cry. Put a love in your heart. Take a good look around, and if you're looking down, put a little love in your heart. And the world will be a better place, and the world will be a better place for you and me. Just wait and see. Put a little love in your heart. 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 We want the world to know we won't let hatred grow. Put a little love in your heart. I hope when you decide this will be your guide. Put a little love in your heart, and the world will be a better place, and the world will be a better place for you and me. Just wait.